Welcome to the Art of Lifting podcast. Today I am joined by Beth. You were one of my first guests, I think like second or third guests when I first started
Yeah.
this podcast. We did a whole, I think it was like a 2 hour episode, just all about so many different things. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. But I brought you on today because you've been doing a lot of work and you do work around confidence and kind of self-improvement is like a really big thing that you advocate for. You also do have your own podcast that I'll get you to shout out as well. But before we do that, did you want to just let people know kind of what you do for work and a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. It's so exciting to be back. That was one of my favorite episodes that even I've recorded. So definitely go and listen to it. I'm Beth. I'm actually one of Sean's clients. I'm an under 69 powerlifter, but I also have my own coaching business, which is really for the woman that just wants to go all in. I've started a lot with Gen Pop and then moved into strength only. And I've really realized that there are so many gaps about truly becoming your strongest self, because it isn't ever just about the lifting. Of course, there's so many avenues that go into it, and so really where we are at the moment is tying all of those things together. It's all about the lifting, yes, but it's also about the mindset and, like Sean said, about the confidence, and it's really where my heart lies. And I think this now is where I'm starting to see some absolutely insane results from clients, because it's such important work. So I'm really excited to get cracking and talk about it today.
Perfect. So yeah, I think it sounds quite an obvious thing, you know, your mindset and how you mentally, like how you think of yourself, how you think of your ability and things will obviously have an impact on your results. But I do think it's something that people don't give enough attention to, because there is a lot of work involved in becoming more confident in yourself, in what you can do. And yeah, I thought it'd be a really interesting episode just to talk through different things that people can do to maybe help themselves. But yeah, so firstly, you have a podcast, and I think most of the episodes are kind of tailored around different tricks down that avenue, are they not?
Yeah, it's a very blended approach. There's a lot of work specifically on the mindset, on confidence, on identity, but there is also a lot, of course, around lifting and sort of contextualizing everything. But it is very much, it's called Lift to Lift Yourself. You can find me on Spotify, but it really is about that, because when I launched the podcast, it was actually on World Mental Health Day. And I think we touched on this in the first episode where we sort of talked a bit more about my journey, but that's really what got me into lifting. And so the podcast itself sort of launched around that, around, touching on mental health and the importance of that as to why so many of us lift and are where we are, but also then starting to bridge the gap of, okay, well, if we have these crazy goals around strength, that's so exciting, but there's a lot of work that goes into actually becoming that lifter, so much more than just beyond the strength and the programming. And that's really kind of what I get into in the podcast, is all of those gaps and bridging them.
Yeah. I think one thing that has to be said, like as a coach, one of my favorite, and I've said this on podcasts before, but one of my favorite parts of being a powerlifting coach, like I know you don't do specifically powerlifting. I think you do have powerlifters as well. But in any kind of realm, obviously big priority is helping them get their SPD movements up. But what I actually really find the most rewarding with this job isn't the progress people make from comp to comp or just in their gym lifts. It's seeing them grow as a person and the confidence that they get just from, I don't know, like the confidence you get when you squat 100 kilos for the first time, which when you first start in the gym, like that's not a realistic goal. That's never going to be me, and little things like that. And obviously when you then hit that 100, you keep setting your expectations higher and higher. And that's where I actually think a lot of lifters start to lose that initial kind of buzz around their PBs, because it's almost like you start chasing the next one, that you don't then appreciate where you are, which is when I then think, and I see this with lifters a lot as well, where you keep thinking that you're going to firstly keep making the same progress as when you first started, and then you get bogged down that your progress stalls, but also you then fall into that comparison trap, and you then are thinking more negatively about what you're doing, even though you're still making progress, you're still doing these incredible things. It almost becomes chasing numbers, chasing progress, chasing other people and where they're at, and not enjoying and appreciating where you're at compared to where you were, and the fact that you're on this journey to obviously getting where you need to be, which I think can then link in with the confidence aspect of your confidence is then automatically knocked. You're going to go into your session and maybe not believe that you can do it, or already tell yourself, let's say one of your lifts particularly is feeling bad right now, like your bench is feeling bad, you're going through a phase of bench not feeling how it sometimes does, it's stalled for a little while, you then have that negative association, which will then knock your confidence. And if your confidence is low, you're not going to achieve what you can, because you don't have that self-belief. Like self-belief is the most important thing as a lifter. When you talk to these higher level lifters, something I've really learned from doing a lot of these podcasts, there's this level of delusion you have to have if you want to move it
Literally.
along. Like, you have, obviously realistic delusion, but you have to have some delusion in order to keep progressing and think you can do these things. Because if you tell you, like, if you get a mental block with a number, anything like that all comes down to your self-belief.
Delulu is a word that I use all the time in my coaching, in my podcast, in my content, because like this is what you have to tap into realistically to get to those next heights. And again, very similarly, like working with the caliber of clients that I now do, very similar. This is kind of what we've seen, is that there's so much to unpick in what you've just said that I absolutely adore, because I am exactly the same. And that's kind of the reason that my coaching looks the way that it does now, because getting stronger is so fun and it's so incredible seeing my clients do what they do. But I actually posted something recently that was like, I could not give a fuck what you lift, because look, very similar to what you've just said, it never to me is about the milestones. Like, whilst my clients are the same as yours, achieve insane things, like to me that isn't actually the bit that gets me more excited. That is the cherry on top. It's all of the rest of like the cake and all of the things that have gone into those layers that are 10 times more exciting and I think deserve celebrating more than anything else. It's the person that you become in that process. It's the things that you've shifted, the things that you've proved, like even the sacrifices that you've had to make, the identities that you've left behind that literally get you that result. And I think this is what so many people miss. And it's the thing that even just talking about my clients, sometimes words cannot describe like what has gone into that journey and that progress. And I think exactly that, like, one of my favorite phrases is that you can be a work of art and a work in progress all in one. And I think when we talk about, you know, zooming out, looking at the big picture of journeys and getting to those like low-key Delulu levels, is that you have to still appreciate where you are, but also understand that that doesn't mean you have to accept it and that you don't get to still, you know, look forward to absolutely crazy levels of strength. And I think having that appreciation is so important, but it's also pairing that and like actually being able to bridge those gaps as you go, because like you said, it's the confidence, it's the self-belief, it's those low-key levels of Delulu. But I think what's often amiss is how hard it is to get to that. And I think that this is what I've sort of covered a lot in my podcast, is that obviously I have like episodes that will go super deep into it, like a micro specific topic. And then sometimes it'll be actually, you know, the more that we progress, we realize that whilst that is important, you know, education and value is really, really important to me inside my podcast and my content, for I think helping us to understand how we start to bridge these gaps. But I think a lot of the time we underestimate how much like faster we would be able to achieve things if sometimes we just do. And like, this is what I love about mindset, is it's so important and it's so valuable to understand and to educate around it. And you can truly see like incredible levels of confidence and shifts. Like, this is what I've seen with myself, is in 6 months, like I'm a different person, and that is down to mindset work and putting that time in. But so much of that is also into understanding and taking the action anyway, because I think something that we often underestimate is how much time we can spend on something for the sake of it. And so this is now a really interesting place that I'm at with even my own like mindset journeys. You spend the time as you always would. Let's say, for example, you were wanting to improve your deadlift, right? You're gonna have to do some work on your technique, but there will also come a point where, again, I related this similarly in a podcast episode where I almost associate those early stages of building your technique with like driving a car. There is a difference between learning to pass your test and learning to actually drive on the real roads. And I think a lot of the time, you know, technique can become a bit of a safety blanket to hide behind before you then start actually pushing the big weights. And sometimes you just need to drive the car. And it's a lot like that when it comes to mindset as well, as there is important work that, yes, has to be done, that absolutely has its place. But also on the other side of things, you have to do, because sometimes what can also happen is when we get caught up in doing mindset work, which is so integral, there can often come points where it's like we become so self-aware that we get caught up on pinpointing specific things. And, you know, maybe I need to work through this, maybe I need to work through that. And actually it starts becoming creating mind drama for the sake of creating mind drama so that we don't take action. I think when it comes to strength and setting these big goals, like pushing your confidence, and I know that we'll talk about like how we do that and shifting limiting beliefs, and of course we'll talk about how we do that as well. But I think the main thing that I really want to get across as well today is all of that is so integral, but what's more important is also taking the action, is being able to shift those things so that you can take the Delulu level goals and go after them. But it's also having the conviction, and this is what's really different between like belief work and confidence and actual conviction is just doing the thing regardless of the external validation or evidence to show that it's working. And that's a really hard thing to tap into, but this is something that I've seen with myself, the biggest shifts I've seen in the last few months with my clients, with other lifters. Like you said, that the highest caliber of athletes that you will speak to have that level of Delulu. And it's not unfounded. It's just usually this understanding that, yes, all of that other work is important. And of course, if we don't have those rock solid foundations, you can't start to build on that with confidence and with those next levels. But it's also leaning a little bit into, okay, but I'm going to have to take the scary action. Like, I am going to have to feel the fear and do the thing anyway. I am going to have to feel these levels of Delulu and everything coming at me saying you can't do it, and all of these limiting beliefs coming in. But I'm probably going to have to take the action even before those beliefs have been shifted anyway.
That was amazing. There's a few things that I want to pick up on. I'm going to pick up on the most recent thing first. So you said about how you have to feel the fear and do things anyway, which I really love that, because obviously we're speaking more on a strength kind of basis, but that applies to everything in life. Like, if you're nervous to do something and you then allow yourself to not do it because of those feelings, you're never going to make that progress. And it literally is the exact same thing, as simple as something like loading up a PB. If you don't go for it, you're never going to hit it, even if you're not sure if you're ready. If you don't go for it, you're never going to get it, and that's going to hold you back even more as well. Or even something, and I think this is something that you can probably relate to from like when you first shifted over to me, because I think before you worked with me, I think your training was a lot more RPE focused and very much like kind of RPE caps, whereas with me, as you kind of know, RPE is just a rough target. I'm a lot more laid back about RPE. Obviously, that doesn't give permission to overshoot. But I think it's that thing of, you've got a working set of 6 on bench and it's meant to be at an RPE 7. And like with me, I'm like, it needs to be roughly an RPE 7. But by your 4th set, probably going to be feeling a bit more fatigued. It might be more like an 8, maybe a little bit more like, you might just, that last rep might just be that little bit harder. And a lot of people will then not load that little bit of extra weight, so they won't hit that little volume PB, which obviously the volume PBs over time make a massive difference to your overall PBs. And it's kind of learning to sometimes push those boundaries. In that, I'm obviously trying to apply this to training as much as possible, and that's kind of the first example that kind of came to my head there. Like, not even just loading up a new 1 rep max, which is obviously always going to be a bit scary, but even just little things like your volume that you're doing or something like that. Like, just don't be afraid to just try 2.5 more. Just try it and see what happens. What I think the biggest thing for me, like not just with training but with everyday life, it's always, okay, I'm super nervous for this thing. What's the worst that's going to happen? If it doesn't result in death or catastrophe, it's probably worth trying. Like,
literally,
because also, like, if you embarrass yourself, oh well. Like, I think even the embarrassment factor, like, you get to a point in life where you just don't really care anymore. You can laugh it off. Like, I used to be, I think this is completely a tangent, but I remember when I was younger, embarrassment was like the worst thing in the world for me. Like, when I was, I don't know if it's when I was the youngest child, like I had an older brother that would like bully me all the time. We had to school and stuff. But like, I remember if I saw someone else embarrassed, I would want to cry, because I just was like, I can't imagine how horrible that feels. And then when I would then
she's an empath.
especially with embarrassment. But like, when I was embarrassed, I'd want to cry. And it was like, still to this day, if I see someone and I see that they're actually feeling really embarrassed, especially like as an adult, it does make me want to like cry for them, because I'm like, you don't need to feel that way. And as I got older, basically exposure therapy, I just kept admitting when I was doing something stupid, or if something went terribly wrong, I would just put my hands up and laugh about it. And it's that exposure to it. And I think it's completely, I'm going to try and bring this back to the point. It's the thing of, you know, if you're scared to do something, just try it anyway. And if it doesn't work, just move on. Just forget about it, just move on. Whether that's in lifting with a bad training session, or something to do with work, or any aspect of your life. If it doesn't work out how you expected it to, or the risk didn't pay off, that's okay, as long as no one's died, and as long as you know, you can come back from it. Like, you're not going to lose your house. Like, you know what I mean? Like, realistically, you have to put things into perspective, and I think that's a really important thing to do. And I think that also then links in again with training, and you have to put things in perspective of, if I go for this today, like if you're 4 weeks out from comp, probably don't load up a massive PB. But if you're in the middle of an off-season block and you're like, oh, I might have this, but I'm really scared, what's the harm in going for it? Like, you can then always adjust. That was one of the things I wanted to point on. I didn't mean to go on a tangent there, but I think this episode is literally just going to be us both going
100%.
on tangents. You mentioned the driving the car analogy, which I really, really love. And I remember when you posted this before. So over queuing, and then you mentioned about sometimes you just have to do, like when you learn to drive a car, it's very much like you have this one set way of doing things, and then obviously over time things will adjust a little bit and you'll kind of get into your own natural way of doing things. And that does very much link into lifting. Like when you first start training, when you first start lifting, of course technique is important, learning to brace is important, that like all of that is incredibly vital when you first start. But if your goal is to be the strongest version of yourself, no matter whether that's SBD movements or other movements, you are eventually going to have to push past that point of being able to fully control your technique, in hopes that obviously your technique is natural enough at this point that it's just going to come naturally. But there's probably going to be an element of breakdown, right? Like, how often do you see someone do an RPE 10 lift and there isn't some element of some kind of breakdown? Yeah. But I think what people then do is when they start to see that little bit of breakdown, they can then almost fall into that paralysis by analysis like bubble and overthink everything, and then feel like they have to strip everything back. And again, linking this into kind of the point of the episode, that then knocks their confidence so much that they're then also almost building up even more of a fear of ever pushing harder in case something happens. And actually, I don't know if I should mention this on here, but that makes me think of someone like the newer coaches and stuff that I see coming up that are very technique focused, which with a new lifter, 100% you need to look at technique. But over queuing won't help because it'll be too much. Like, you need to get into, and I really like the flow state with lifting, and obviously that takes a long time and potentially years to get right. But by the time you're pushing those max effort loads, you should have some level of just natural ability to fall into your movement pattern. And if you over cue anything, like as a coach, if you're telling your lifter to cue like 4 or 5 different things on a movement, that's going to feel so overwhelming. And again, then they're going to look at their videos. Like, I had a friend who was really struggling with her bench press for a long time, and her coach was, obviously there's so many elements to a bench press, just to give a like real life example, like the way you set up, there are so many different pinpoints to it, but you're not going to focus on all that at once, right? Or you shouldn't be focusing on all of that at once, which she was trying to do. And it was literally paralysis by analysis. And then she would dread every single bench session because she'd watch her videos back. She'd noticed that she missed off 1 or 2 of these cues that she'd been given out of like a list of 5. And she'd then just feel awful. She'd kind of have a bit of a strop, and then everything would feel really heavy. She'd just want to cry, and she'd give up on the rest of her session because she just felt like she couldn't do anything and she was failing because of this. And I don't know if you're like this with lifters, but I don't know if I'm just a bit too laid back with some things, but I mean, it's working, so I'm not ashamed to admit it. I always think, especially with newer people, you have to trust their body to put them where they feel strong. Again, you cover the basics, you get them in a safe position, you teach them how to brace, you teach them the main points that they need very slowly over time. But overall, you have to trust that their body is going to gradually put them where they feel strongest, and you work from there. And I think that's something that will then help the lifter feel more confident as well, because they have more trust in their body rather than trusting in a set technique, if that makes sense. That was a very big tangent. I apologize.
No, but it's exactly this. Like, we all know overqueuing is never going to get anyone to a productive outcome. The way that I like to think about it sometimes is like when it's a little bit like, what's the best example? So it's a bit like if you were to go somewhere, right? If you've got an end destination, you're going to type in that end destination. You're not going to be like, where do I not hit traffic? Because it's a lot like if you were to type into Google, it's all to do with search terms, right? And it'll basically cling to like the keyword. And that's kind of how our brains work as well. Like with queuing, if you tell yourself like, don't bomb into the hole, don't do this, don't do that, that's what your brain ends up focusing on. And especially with overqueuing, that's of course when the overwhelm is going to hit, especially when you've got multiple different things. There's zero clarity. That's the importance of singularity of focus at times. But also when you're queuing yourself with stuff like, don't do this, don't do this, that's what your brain sees. Like literally, if I was to say to you, like, don't think of a pink elephant, well, what's the first thing you're going to think of as a pink elephant, right? And so this is what ends up starting to happen. It is having the clarity in your cues, and it is a lot like when you're learning to drive. Like, we have to have those early stages of building technique, because there's a big difference between like when you're learning to drive, it's like over exaggeration of checking your mirrors and, indicate and, brake like 20 meters before a roundabout, but that's not how you actually drive, and it doesn't end up preparing you. If you were to carry on doing like that, everyone's either going to think you're a weirdo or it's not actually productive. It doesn't help you to react in those types of situations. And lifting is very much the same. Like you said, like yes, clarity in cues is so important, and like not over cueing, having that singularity of focus and clarity. But absolutely, there comes a time when we kind of just have to build the independence. And this is a stage that I personally love, because I know that it means I've done my job properly. But actually, it can be quite an uncomfortable point as a lifter. Like with a lot of the women that I coach, I so vividly remember I was on holiday a few weeks ago, and on one of my video analysis days, my client, like, she hit a beautiful deadlift. It was still a little bit newer to her, but I was like, oh, gorgeous. Like, this week, I just want you to implement like this. Just go and allow yourself to tie all of those loose ends together, because we've worked a lot on building the technique. And she was like, like, panic, because a lot of the time what starts to happen is like cues become a bit of a safety blanket, don't they? And that's almost, it masks confidence, because we're like, yes, I have clarity, I know what I need to focus on, and I know what I need to go and do. But again, it's a lot like learning to drive. You're not always going to have that person next to you, and it isn't a bad thing, but it means we have to kind of start building that confidence, and have a point where we do just drive. Because like I said, like, chasing textbook form, it does become a safety blanket, and it's a way to almost like feel in control, and sometimes to often avoid the real work. Like, literally what you said at the very start was around every time if there's a slight deviation in your form, and then you strip that weight back because you're too scared to allow it to be a little bit heavy, well, that's of course how stuff is gonna, take 10 times longer, and you're not actually allowing yourself to build the resilience in those positions. You're also probably never going heavy enough to see where the breakdowns happen, to then indicate in the future what might need working on. And like, eventually you've just got to drive the fucking car. Like, it is a very hard skill to master, but that again is kind of feeding into the feeling that fear and doing it anyway, like leaning into that little bit of delulu is like, okay, well, I'm as confident as I can be right now, so let me actually just see how I'm going to perform, how I'm going to hold my technique under that load, because it is difficult, but that is ultimately what's going to make you stronger. And like, circling back to something you said earlier around kind of shifting the fear, there's two techniques I love to this, and one was what you basically said, is like following it through to the end. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Because a lot of the time we do catastrophize, and of course then it seems overwhelming. But there's something else when it comes to fear that I love as a huge reframe, is like, what if that's actually a sign to lean in? Like, I think it's so drilled into us that fear is a bad thing. Fear is a sign to stop, to pull back. And obviously, like, even just looking at evolution, it's so hardwired into this that danger equals, fear equals danger, and that equals bad. But something that I think is so interesting to understand about, the subconscious, about limiting beliefs, is that your subconscious is hardwired to protect you. So its literal main function is to keep you safe, but it also runs 95% of our day. And so when we're constantly feeding into that, a reframe that I love around like limiting beliefs even is actually treating them as limiting decisions. Because a lot of the time when we are feeding into these things, we give away our power, thinking, oh, it's just how I feel. Yeah, but you are in the driver's seat. Like, you can actually take control of this. And actually, just that complete flip on its head of seeing it as a limiting decision, it's never ever to belittle or judge, but actually understanding that you are repeating this every single time you allow that to take over. And even down to fear, like, because our subconscious is, created in that way to protect us, well, when that fear comes up, what if that's actually a sign that you are on the cusp of blowing something up? What if it's a sign that you are on the cusp of, completely moving to that next level, right? And so rather than fear being like, oh my God, I'm scared to load this, I can't do it, if you can lean in, that is just your subconscious almost going, oh my God, you're about to become someone that I can't protect, because we're in unknown territory, right? And it's a lot of the time your subconscious will prefer an uncomfortable hell, because it's familiar and it's what it knows, to, something that is completely unbeknown, but to you might be exciting. Like, this is why when we're in stages where we're really anxious, we really just don't enjoy training, or we don't love what we're doing at that very moment, and even though we're miserable, that to your subconscious is safety, because it's what it knows, versus actually taking the scary action, jumping to that next level. It's unfamiliar to your subconscious, but that's what we want. But that's why it feels 10 times safer. Sorry, that's why it feels 10 times scarier to do. And so a reframe that I love around fear, whether this relates to cues and, taking that to the next level, or maybe it's at a stage where you don't have those cues anymore and you're in just building, or whatever it is, when it's unfamiliar, when there is fear, when there is discomfort, I love being like, this is my opportunity to lean the fuck in. If I back away, I'm going to stay where I am and I'm going to stay stuck. What if this is my sign that you are literally on the cusp? You do this one thing, you lean into this one particular set, you're going to break through to the next level. You lean into that extra 2.5 kilos, like even at a lower level. Well, you're building things up. And I love that. That is what's accumulating like a huge total now. And it is those little things, but reframing fear as a sign, a green flag instead of a red one, is like one of the biggest things that you could do to shift your mindset and to blow up your confidence.
I absolutely love that. And it's literally just the analogy of every time you're scared and you do something out of your comfort zone, you're essentially just leveling up. And it is true though, like you are improving as a person, because if it goes wrong, okay, I won't do that specific thing again. If it works, you've just unlocked a whole new way of like doing something or lifting or whatever it is that you're kind of working towards and you're scared of doing. And it reminds me actually of when I don't know if you listened to the episode with Adria a while back. So I got her on because she's very big on mindset. She's more bodybuilding now than she's powerlifting, but she's also a coach and she coaches females only, which I think a big thing with her is helping them become more confident as well. And she essentially was saying like the biggest thing you can do to become more confident is essentially take ownership of the fact that you are in control. And obviously there's things in life that you can't control, and that, but you control what you can control. And
you
part
also
of what
control
you can
how you
control,
respond to them. Yeah,
exactly. It's how you respond to things, and it's the decision you make when you are faced with something that you're scared to do is such a big thing about taking control. And I think even just linking it back to when I was saying about how I used to get so like overwhelmed by the idea of being embarrassed by something that it would hold me back, I just made the decision to not care anymore, which obviously sounds simpler than it is. And there was a transition period where I still really cared and things would still bother me, but I didn't want to care anymore. So I took ownership of that, which is a very difficult thing to do, and it is a scary step to take. And not just with obviously that one specific example, but anything in life, it is. And I think the hardest part of it all is actually accepting and believing that you are in control, and allowing yourself to live that way. Because I think it's very easy to make excuses to say, oh, but XYZ reason I can't control this, but actually you're limiting yourself by hiding behind these excuses, I think sometimes.
It is exactly this. And when, again, we have fears, when we have reservations, like something that I always say to my clients is like, it never ever, like love and shove is literally like one of the pillars of my coaching, because it's never ever like, I'm not going to coddle you because that's not productive, but I'm also not going to be a bitch. Obviously, it's that love and shove, because it always comes from a place of love and seeing someone's potential and holding them to that standard. Like obviously life is going to happen, obviously things are going to happen, but I think the biggest thing that you can do as a coach, or even for yourself, whether or not you have a coach, is actually see that it is a disservice to yourself, to your standards, to your training, whatever you want to apply this to not hold yourself to those standards. Like, yeah, like life happens and we've all been there. Like, of course, it's easy to step into victim and things, but when we are in those states, like you are always going to act in alignment with that headspace. And the biggest thing that you can do is just decide, you know what? No. Like just literally deciding to be more confident. It is accepting that there's a level of delulu, of course, but it's just, this is a lot of like side tangent, like identity work, and of course there's shifting limiting beliefs and things that go into this, but you could literally just decide today, like you could wake up today and be like, I'm going to make this the best day of my life. You could have like a week one session. You could be like, I'm going to romanticize the shit out of this and I'm going to make it the best session of my life. Like you have that power. And so I think it's a reframe of like, you know, things are happening and, oh, but I'm not sure how to shift it. And of course there is space for that. And of course there is a lot of importance in, you know, addressing those things, but I really think it's doing yourself a disservice not to own the power that you actually have and the control that you do have over your own life. Like you'd said, if stuff happens that is out of your control, well, you still have control over how you respond to that. Like, let's say you had a shit session, like you ticked every single box that you possibly could, you slept really well, your nutrition's on point, like all of your recovery's been dialed the fuck in, you hit all of your focus points and it still didn't move how you wanted it to for whatever reason. Okay, that out of your control, but you are in control of how you respond to that. You are in control of messaging your coach so that there can be adjustments made. You are in control of still submitting that for video analysis and maybe looking at like, well, I really wanted this to be a good session, but actually watching this back objectively, I can see that maybe I didn't do this. So what, do you know what I mean? There's so much that even out of your control things that you still have control over. I think it's a reframe of not what often happens when we talk about this type of topic, or you see something like that online, like you're going to feel triggered. Okay, but it's for good reason, because you resonate with it and you know that there's probably an element where you are giving your power away. And it's never ever to judge, like I say, to belittle or be like, you're not doing good enough. I think, again, this is a side tangent, but this is where often we internalize things, and it's what we make it mean about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves off the back of it, that actually will dictate your outcomes. Like, as humans, we have to attach meaning to something for it to make sense to us. And so a lot of the time when we're talking about, like, even just having the confidence to do something, if you're not showing up in that confidence, yes, of course there are reasons, but you're also choosing to show up how you are. And that, as I say, is not to belittle, but the reason that you're probably a bit like, oh, that stung, is because you know deep down that is what you're doing, and it's you giving away your power and knowing that things could be going so much better. And this is what I love about this space, is that it is never being like you aren't doing good enough. If you are internalizing it this way, I had a really amazing conversation actually with a client about this the other day, where she was, let's say, getting feedback from me. And I always start with being like, this looks really good. This is what we're doing really well, because it's so important to celebrate those times, to, again, have even just productively understand what's working well. But she actually reflected, right? And I was sending her feedback and I was like, okay, cool. This, like, we've nailed this now. Even if we're at the stage where I'm like, this is what I want you to focus on next. It's simply a progression of like, you've done your job. This cue has been embedded. Happy. I'm a happy coach. Here's what we're going to now move on to help refine it. She realized that she was taking that personally. Like, she was making it mean something about herself. So she'd be excited to send me a video. And whilst I'm really happy with that video, we also want to have productive outcomes of that. And I would give her a bit of feedback and she'd be like, oh, fuck. And she'd make it mean something about her that immediately will, that means that's further validation that I'm not good enough. And we had a really, really amazing check-in call around this, because a lot of the time it's the meaning that we attach to something that signals, okay, so this is where we need to work on it. That's a slight side tangent to what I was actually saying, but a lot of the time it is around the stories that we tell ourselves. And as much as we're now doing work on starting to rewrite and shift that limiting belief, and she's also enabling herself to take more productive action around it, what we looked at was like, okay, so how can we now put you back in the driver's seat? Because that, we know, is just your subconscious taking over, literally telling you stories. So whilst we're also going to do work on this in our deep dive calls and, you know, behind the scenes, how can we start taking action now, doing the do, and literally, you know, taking your power back in the situation? I don't know if that makes sense. That was like 3 in 1.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think we'll just start off with what you said about obviously your call with your client. And it's essentially internalizing the criticism. And it's Zuko's digging my carpet. Sorry, everyone. Never have the dog in the room for a podcast. I'm learning. But yeah, internalizing that criticism. And to be honest, this is something I've always been guilty of as well, which I think is a big part of why when I was younger, I didn't want to hire a coach, because I just wanted to do it myself, because I don't think I could have coped very well with that criticism, which now really again, I think is something I would be better at now, but I still probably wouldn't be great at it, just because it's obviously not something I'm used to in terms of my own lifting. But I think it's really, I like what you said about how you always start with the positive. So I think as a coach, you have to do that. Like, you can't always be on fix this now, fix this now, fix this now. Like, you have to celebrate. And actually, I'm going to link this to my boyfriend's wrestling, which is a completely random side tangent. But one thing, because I did wrestling very briefly, very, very briefly, didn't like it. I like the exercise, I didn't like the shows. But yeah, one thing that I always say to him that I didn't like about it was, it's a very critical industry. I don't know if it's just the industry in this area, but it seems to be like a more like common thing. It's you'll have a match on a show, and no matter the size of the show, the first thing that happens is everyone backstage tells you what you can do to make it better. And I said to him, why is there never a, like, have the night to celebrate how well it went, if you got a really good crowd reaction, if you like a certain spot went really well, but there is never that, because it's always, okay, but how can I do better next time? Which is a good thing to want to know how to do better, but you then get in this mindset of always coming home in this horrible mood because you haven't actually gone out and enjoyed your work. Like, and it's something that I said to him before, like, that's why I could never do it again, because I just think you need to be able to celebrate, especially because I was obviously not very good and very new, especially for newer people. And I think this applies with newer lifters as well. You need to celebrate the positives and then work on what needs fixing or what needs addressing. And I think it's also important as well, like, as a lifter, as a client, you are hiring someone to help you progress and improve. You want them to give you something to work on, because if you have nothing to work on, then you're essentially just getting a program, which also isn't a bad thing. There are phases where I have lifters that have been doing it for so long now that I won't really give them much feedback for a while, because things are just going as they should be and there's not anything specific to work on. or we've spent like I think you're a good example here. Like we've spent this first half of this year working on your deadlift. Well, going into comp now, we're probably not going to be working on your deadlift for the next 8 weeks. We're just going to be like slowly increasing those loads, getting you used to those loads again.
Yeah.
If I was sitting here giving you more and more feedback for your specifically for your deadlift after all the work we've been doing, we're not going to be questioning everything as things get heavier. So I've got the dog on my lap. But yes, that's something I want to just say. It just made me think of wrestling and how, like, as an industry, again, it might just be like the indie scene that they're very much critical of what you do, and there's no celebration of what you've done well. And I think that is probably, like, I can't imagine many people stick around because of that, because it's such a negative way to be. And I think with your lifting, if you are watching your videos back, just to link it back in, if you're watching your videos back during your session and you're watching it and you're criticizing everything you're doing and trying to guess what your coach is going to criticize, and then you want to point out before your coach points out, which is something that I think a lot of lifters do as well, you're looking for the negatives, you're not looking for the positives. And I do think if you are a lifter that does that, do not watch your footage back until after the session is done, because otherwise it will affect the rest of your session. Again, linking that into my friend with her bench press when she was really struggling with that. Her entire session was ruined because she'd watched her bench press and think it looked terrible because one thing was wrong, which I've been doing this sport for 8 years now. Sometimes my sets are ugly for no apparent reason other than I was a little bit lazy. And that's fine. It happens. Like, we're lifting weights at the end of the day. Like, it's not that serious. Obviously, we have goals and we want to do well and we need to execute as well as we can. But sometimes things are going to be a little bit rusty. Things aren't going to move quite as well. And that is okay. It's about calling yourself out for it, either in the moment or for the next session. And I think normally I would say to someone to take it session to session rather than obviously set by set, because you need to just focus on getting the work done and keeping that positive mindset rather than, again, paralysis by analysis. Watch your videos back during your session, find all the negative things, well, then you're in a negative mindset for the rest of your session and probably the rest of your as well. I also wanted to link it to, you were saying about how, you know, when you do have a bad session, like, you have the power to control your day. You can say, right, I'm going to have the best session of my life today. And sometimes that's not going to be what happens. Okay, that's fine. But in those moments, I don't know what you're like when you have a bad session in terms of like how you kind of compartmentalize. But I know for me, one thing that I do, rather than letting myself get super bogged down, is I kind of just remember why I do it. And as I've been in the sport longer, I have a lot more competitive goals, and I have got really ambitious goals I've never said aloud, and I'm probably never going to say aloud unless they come true. But I have really ambitious goals within the sport. And so it's really easy for me to be critical of a bad session because I always think I'm so far away from where I want to be. I can't afford to have a bad session. But then I think back to 16-year-old me walking into the gym for the first time, whose goal was to be as skinny and as little as possible. And then a year later, she'd discovered, oh, actually, I'm naturally quite strong. And then someone introduced me to powerlifting, and I just really enjoyed training for powerlifting. And I think back to the original phase of my life when it came to going to the gym and how my goals were and it was a diet culture thing. It was a very negative approach to the gym, what I wanted to achieve. And now when I look back after a bad session, I'm like, you are a completely different person to who you were like 10 years ago when you joined the gym. And that person would be so incredibly amazed at the person that I am now, and like doing what I love for a job and all of these things. But that one bad session, when you then look back at the bigger picture, is literally nothing. Like, it's nothing. I can't remember my bad sessions because they're so minuscule compared to the rest of this whole journey, and not just powerlifting specific, but just the gym in general and my life in general, that it's not worth being bogged down by. Like, look at any learning points you can take, and if you've got a coach, send your stuff to your coach. They'll maybe give you some feedback on what to work on. Try not overanalyze it yourself, and then just take that feedback and move forwards. Like, you don't need to, like, and it's a very cliche thing, but a bad session is just a lesson. It's not going to be detrimental to anything.
I really, really echo like everything that you just said. Like, bad sessions are quite honestly an inevitability, and I think even just objectively that boils down to managing expectations, and truly that is a skill over time. Like you said at the very beginning, like, if you are newer to lifting, newbie gains, of course you're going to skyrocket, of course you're going to be like riding a high. So how do you deal with it when that changes? Well, that's about managing expectations, and that is, like I said, a skill that you develop over time. But I think when those bad sessions hit, like, this a lot of the time comes back to even just the practice of, like I said, it's what we make it mean about us. And the minute you internalize it, the more you're reinforcing that this is because of you. And that's a story that we don't want to feed into, because we know that there's going to be a lot of externals that we can't control. There's going to be certain reasons. I love that you mentioned about the why, because I think this is literally what I do as well. And you've even pointed this out to me. Like I said, I'm one of Sean's clients, and I had a session a while ago. I hit a 130 PB, like rep PB. And do you remember, I was like not happy with it. And you were like, Beth, the fact that you were even mad about like 130 for this number of reps, it says just how much like your confidence has grown. I think in those moments it is a reframe of like, if I'm upset about this session, like again, even maybe just deciding in that moment, of course emotions are hard to regulate, but it is again a skill that you practice. But even just that reframe about like, oh my God, what a blessing to be like upset, disappointed about this now not going that well. Like, holy fuck, what an incredible place to be, where this number, this level, these number of reps or whatever are a point that I get to be upset about, that I get to be disappointed about. And that I think is such a crucial reframe that I really love doing. And I think, like I said, managing expectations is so important, even just for regulating this stuff, and knowing, you know, that ultimately the goals, like even just to get down to the nitty gritty, is understanding, well, do I have the right to be upset, but I think to a certain extent, like let's say you are in a building phase where you are intentionally accumulating more fatigue. Well, if you're then, you know, expecting to be at absolute peak strength and being able to display that all of the time, that's a misalignment of expectation. That's where you kind of don't get to be as upset. Maybe there's a lack of education. Maybe we need to go and clarify with your coach, or, you know, get a bit clearer on some things. But I think that is sort of a side tangent, that just being able to manage your expectations in line with what your goals are in that block, what you're actually focusing on, is important. That having bad sessions are an inevitability. And I think, again, is a skill that you develop in how you build, you know, well, how am I going to deal with this, which is really important. And I think also this is just down to, like, again, building the practice around something. Because I think something you'd said earlier is like, when we're in that negative headspace, like even if, for example, you would take the example that you gave about wrestling or boxing, or literally, again, even for me, like as I grew up as a dancer, like this is a big thing about environment. It was never ever, oh wow, that was really good. It was straight onto like, and it's so drilled into you. But when it comes down to being in that environment, I use this example a lot when I talk about, for example, shoulding. So like when we say, I should be at this level, I should be able to hit that, what we're doing is you're inherently coming from a place of like implicit criticism. And I love reflecting back to my clients in this, is like, okay, if you were in a work environment or in a relationship that was, you were being constantly criticized, are you going to perform or to function better? No, like, no, obviously not. And I think this is where, like, even just building self-awareness of having those shit sessions and then saying, oh, well, I should be able to hit this, is, I think, just calling yourself out. Like, this is such a skill about recognizing how often you use it when that stuff is coming in. Like, even just asking yourself, like, do I agree? Where the fuck has this even come from? Because so often it'll either be someone, you know, when you were 5 years old in school told you that you weren't good enough to do this thing and you've internalized it and now you're applying it to everything in your life. Or it's something that you've just told yourself that kind of has no like real grounding. And so this is like how I think we start to even just build the awareness to shifting, being in those states in your training. But I think also it boils down then to confirmation bias. Like if we're having a shit block, well, then we go into the next session expecting it to be shit. One, self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go in expecting a session to be shit, what do you think is going to happen? But that also then starts to confirm beliefs that we have. And this is a really powerful way to shift it. If we're in a shit block, yes, own your power. Yes, know that you have the autonomy to choose how you react, and it is just making those decisions. But also I think being aware of like when you're feeding into things even further. Like it's kind of like I said about earlier, like if I told you think of a pink elephant or don't think of a pink elephant, what do you think of? Like it's sort of those ideas of confirmation bias, and by like byproducts of that being self-fulfilling prophecies, that if we hold a belief, you're going to start subconsciously searching for confirmation for that belief. So let's say you're in a shit block and you're like, I'm just not very good right now. Like I'm just not very strong right now. Life is doing life, whatever. Every time you feed back into that, you're also putting yourself in a position where you're choosing to select evidence to back that up. And of course, it's going to then affirm that more. Of course, that's going to perpetuate it. And shit blocks happen. But the same way that you would build skills under heavy loads, the same way that bracing takes time to understand, the same way that, I don't know, getting used to new belts and shoes and sleeves and stuff, all of those things are skills that take time. And I think it's such, again, a disservice for us to expect that overnight we're just like, oh, that was a shit session, that's never going to happen again. Or, you know, I am in a shit block, I need to get better. Give yourself time. Like, this stuff takes time to either develop the skill to rewrite or to actually overturn. I think this is where even just giving yourself the like what's the word, permission, I suppose, to have patience in this stuff is so important. Like you said, like lifting, for everyone that's probably listening to this podcast, like you have some very high level lifters here, and of course it's going to be important to them, but almost all of them, when you actually listen to their stories, know that they have a life, that sometimes that's going to come up on top, that sometimes shit's going to happen. Well, knowing how to deal with that and having those expectations completely in alignment is so important.
I'm just going to link it in again where you said just at the end there's a few other points I want to cover, but you were saying about how obviously like when I have other high level lifters on here and they have life outside of powerlifting, and actually I think it was on the podcast I just did with Charlie, we were talking about worlds and the recap and everything, and I made a point of saying like seeing Durin's come second in the 83s I was so happy with, because I didn't expect him to even potentially podium, because it depends how the other 83s turned up, which I apologize for saying that out loud, and I did say I didn't want that to be my belief. But I was saying to Charlie, like, I was so glad to see him come second and have a good day, because I know outside of the gym, he has so much other stuff going on in his life. Like, yes, powerlifting is a priority, but his family and his work are most likely more important to him than getting all of his sessions in. Like, he'll still do it, but there's those other priorities. And like Meg Scanlon is another lifter that I am such a big fan of, because she's a mother to twins, not just kids, like twins. And like, she's a phenomenal woman. She's a coach, like, and she's still progressing. She's still battling out with these lifters that, and I think most people will relate with them, which is why obviously like we are such big fans of them, because we can relate to that more than the lifters. Like, and I'm going to use Joe Borenstein as an example here, because he's been on a few times, and I'm a massive fan of Joe as well. But Joe has even said it on here, like his life is tailored around powerlifting. His job is a powerlifting coach. He picks his own hours. He, you know, his roster is the size that works well for him, and he can train kind of when he wants. He can get 10 hours of sleep a night. He can eat specific foods, and he doesn't have to go out and run around all day and have to pick up what's convenient or anything like that. It's less, I mean, it's still incredibly impressive what he's doing, obviously, but it's almost less impressive because his life is tailored to it versus these other people that are like almost like just as competitive, and they've got all these other things going on. And I can't remember what I was going to link this into in terms of the confidence thing, but I think it was almost like the standards you hold yourself to, it's very dependent on what you've got going on. And I think it was the perspective of a training session, right? If you are someone, which most of the people listening to this are not going to fall in the band camp of essentially being professional lifters, are they? Or like not working and having all the free time in the world to train and lift. If that's your life and all you're doing essentially is being a power lifter as well as like coaching and stuff on the side, which obviously is still a career, but in this instance I'm using it as a, you have so much management of your time. It is different to working like a 9 to 5, right? You have all this free time, and training then is going to feel like a much bigger part of your day and your life. So that one bad session, unless you've done a lot of work to get out of this mindset, is going to feel so much more detrimental than if training is at the end of your day, after you've done your job, after you've looked after your kids or whatever you've done that day. Training is such a small portion of your life. Like, yes, you still want the pressure of it going well, but compartmentalize it. It's really not a big deal in the grand scheme of not just your lifting, but your life as a whole. And I think that can make a big difference to how people see their training as well. Does that make sense? I don't think that was the link I was going to make, but we ended up there. Something else you mentioned as well, and it was about kind of how you know, you don't have to be at top end strength year round. Like you can't physically be top end strength year round. Like it's just not possible for so many different reasons. But like you were saying, you know, if you're in more of a building phase, you're quite far out from competition. You can't be expecting to hit top end loads of the time, which you still might, like if your building phase is going well, like volume PBs, whatever. But if you're not hitting your 1 rep max on bench consistently from block to block, or progressing your single on bench from block to block, but you're hitting more bench volume and things, I think something a lot of people really struggle to understand, and something that I feel like I'm saying more and more often to my lifters lately, is you don't have to be strong year round. Like you don't. And to be honest, it's better to not be. And actually, I bit myself in the foot with this because I think I've had so much training momentum myself for the last, probably like the last 2 years, the most momentum I've had literally since I started. And my last competition went terribly because I had a lot of burnout going into it. And I was talking to one of my friends at the competition, and they were like, well, have you not done like a lighter block during your off season just to like mentally decompress? And my response was, I'm not good enough to have earned that yet. Which, as I said it out loud, I was like, that is so backwards. And if one of my lifters said that to me, I think my jaw would drop. I'd be like, what do you mean? Like, you have all of this time. Like, you don't, like, and allowing yourself to take that step back and mentally decompress is going to make you better in the long run. And I fell into that trap of thinking I had to be hitting PBs every single block. I had to be strong year round. It's not achievable. And I think that's something that obviously I need to learn, or at least need to apply in my own training. But it's something that I think a lot of, especially newer people in the gym and newer lifters and power lifters specifically, really need to learn and understand.
Yeah, 100%. I had a really similar conversation actually with a client recently who, to put it into perspective, she's utterly phenomenal, and this sort of ties into that Delulu, right? I always tell my lifters, like, go insanely big with your goals, leave like the actual strategic mapping out to me, like tell me what the end goal is, like the absolute end desire. And like for her at this point, like she had very different goals. She was starting at a very different point. I actually, my most recent podcast episode was walking through her journey because it's been one that has just been utterly incredible. To put it into context, she's added, I think, 67, I think now recording it now, it's probably more like 70, 72 to her total in about 5 or 6 months. Like, she's absolutely blown up. And this, obviously, it's those newer stages, but I know that she'll be able to keep insane momentum. But it's like you've just said, if we still work within the realms of now shifting some of the expectations with how we pace our blocks. And something that was coming up quite frequently in our check-ins was, okay, start of a new block, because again, there's no one size fits all with things, but generally speaking, let's say we have a 4-week block, we're going to build across those weeks, we're going to push to a tougher week 4, and then we're going to bring it back down. So it looks, when we're starting, very up, down, up, down, up, down. But actually over time, if you're listening, I'm doing an upwards motion with my hands if you're watching. Over time, it kind of accumulates that like linear progress, right? And what I think she struggled to understand, and we were seeing a little bit more frequently, was when she was coming to check-ins, it was like, right, start the block. I need to take the pressure off myself and remind myself, like, it's okay if I'm not hitting PBs. And it got to probably like the 3rd block where on week 1s, she was saying that same thing. Like every single, like say start of the week, I send out like an intention setting message for my clients to get, celebrate the wins, get really clear on maybe where the gaps were, and then set kind of goals and micro specific things to make those goals achievable. And one of the things that was always coming up on a week 1 was, need to take the pressure off myself to hit PBs on a week 1. And I was like, so this is like the 3rd block that this has come up. Like, I want to talk about this because it's not a bad thing, and it absolutely is an important reminder, but it's really interesting that this is continuing to come up for you, 3 months in now to this, or to this point. And when we got into it, I pushed her on it, and I will always reflect back to my clients. I will always push them to do that uncomfortable stuff, because it's where we get down to the nitty gritty. And this is, again, how you collapse time in building your confidence, is really not hiding away the stuff and the uncomfortable feelings, it's addressing them and then choosing to take a different stage. And we were seeing quite frequently, she was like, I actually am I'm scared of dropping the weight. And basically this again ties into a little bit of identity work that I've sort of very briefly touched on, but it's when we're clinging to old identity. So when she started with me, she's someone who was always told, like when she was younger, she's weak, that she's small, and something that she wanted to do with me by starting with me was to become strong. Like, she wanted to be a really strong lifter, like have insane amounts of confidence in everything that comes with being a strong person. And what she didn't realize that she was doing, that we eventually pinpointed, was she was clinging to that old identity. There was a part of her that actually probably felt safer, and this is going back to what I said, like felt safer holding on to something even though it wasn't aligned with her, it wasn't actually how she wanted to feel. There was part of her that felt safety in the identity of being weak. And so there was a little bit of pushback around that. But also when we spoke about it, it's that she knew she was at that next level, but she was almost scared to drop it up, to drop the loads on a week 1 in case she regressed, in case she went back to being weak. And it was what, again, she was making it kind of say about her. And it was a really interesting conversation. And we've since shifted it a lot. And like, even just down to, okay, so do we have any evidence that says when I drop the load, I can't rebuild it? Is there a lack of trust there? And again, when we kind of follow it like you did at the start of the episode, when you follow it through to the end, she was like, oh, okay, yes, I see, like, I'm not going to lose all strength. And there is a lot of catastrophizing around it, but it's building that safety around it. And it's a very interesting topic. And I think we can understand something. And this is why, again, the idea of mindset work and building confidence is so important, because all of us, like, we are rational beings as much as we possibly can be. But like you said, you're a coach yourself. I'm a coach myself. This stuff still comes up for us. You'll know this. Like, I have conversations that I probably had a conversation with a client about it a day before, and I'm like, oh, bro, like, come on. It happens. But this is where, like, we have to understand, as much work as we put into consciously knowing, understanding, educating things, the subconscious runs 95% of your day. And this is why, unless we get this stuff on board, unless we build the awareness around it, it will crop up in really sneaky ways. Like you'd said, like I saw with my client. And this is why it's so important, I think, not just to understand the concepts around lifting, around building strength, about programming, about block pacing. Yes, it's all important. Yes, of course, as coaches, we have duties to do that, obviously. But it's also so important to, I think, build the awareness of what stories might be coming up as a byproduct, and having the awareness around limiting beliefs, around knowing why your subconscious does what it does, and actually that you're not crazy for feeling how you do, and while it might not be rational, when you keep telling yourself rational things, it still feels so much stronger. But it's also putting yourself back in the driver's seat to go, okay, I understand the rationale, I also understand the not logical shit that keeps coming up. What do I want to do in this moment? And it's kind of, I think it's such an interesting topic that, yeah, it does come up so often.
And obviously we will go into kind of methods to help break out of these things. But I think one thing quickly that you touched on as well, and you were saying obviously the subconscious is like 95%, right? And talking, like, we're kind of talking is almost as if it's easy, which obviously none of this is easy. And it is, like we said, it's work you have to do on yourself. But it also has to be said that over time, it does get easier. Like, it becomes second nature when you've done it for long enough to allow yourself to lean into what scares you. And you no longer, like, obviously you'll still experience fear. We all going to experience fear. But the things that you found super daunting that you wouldn't face before become natural to you. Like, you don't really have to push through those barriers. And once you prove to yourself once that you can push through the fear, every single time you then do it, it becomes easier. And I think that's worth mentioning. Couple of other things as well is, I like that you said, you know, at the start of the week you go through kind of the intentions with clients, and something that I can imagine is very difficult is, but also beneficial, would be like addressing and saying out loud to your coach and to, like, your clients to say to you what it is that you're almost worried about. And when you said, like, your client would have this fear of regression, I think that's really common. And actually I think that's what fed into me a little bit, pushing too hard and burning out, was obviously I know my week one can start super light and I'm not going to necessarily regress on the week one, which I think is, from what you were saying, kind of what your client was a little bit scared about. But I think if I don't push heavy at the end of each block, am I going to suddenly not be able to lift these loads anymore? Which obviously I know logically isn't the case. And as you kind of said, you know, as coaches, we have to check ourselves, because these are conversations I have with my clients all the time, but applying it to myself is a lot harder. And sometimes you need to just kind of soundboard it. But one thing, again, that I seem to be saying more often is, it's not easy to lose strength. Like, it's not easy to get weaker. Your strength isn't going to go anywhere. Like, as long as you're still training, you're still pushing, it doesn't matter if one lift isn't showing up, or if you're doing a block that's lighter, you're not going to lose your muscle mass. You're not going to lose your ability to do these things. You're literally just focusing on something else at that point. Your strength is still going to be there. Like, people literally take a year out for injury. And again, linking it into a powerlifter, Jonathan Kaiko from USA, he was like top of the 93s for ages, and then his body was just so beaten up. I think he took like a whole year off, and he took a long period of actually not lifting at all. Pretty sure he started like jogging, he lost loads of weight, and he's just come back. And I mean, he placed third at World this year, and like, but he's not lost any strength. Like, his total has gone up in this time. And that's a real world example of, it's not easy to get weaker. You have to just kind of trust the process and trust yourself. And I think for newer lifters, understanding the concept of kind of how we program and how we do things. And, you know, the lighter week one is obviously a really common thing right now. Like, a light week one, a heavy week four is like the typical explanation of kind of how a powerlifter structures their block. And it's like, you have to explain and obviously learn, no, that week one is for you to recover, even if you don't feel like you need that recovery. You need to
Yeah.
allow yourself to recover before you push too hard, and then
Just
you
being
won't feel as strong.
proactive.
Exactly. It's avoiding the fatigue before it gets too much almost. I also want to say as well, and I think linking back to what we were talking about earlier about like how to deal with a bad training session, another thing I like to think of is what is a bad training session? Because the longer you do this, the more that perspective is going to change. Is a bad training session slightly over your RPE on a back off set? Or is a bad training session failing your top set on all 3 lifts?
Yeah.
Neither of which are detrimental. Like, no, not ideal, especially if you're failing like all your top sets, but it's a learning point and you'll take away from it. And also, like, my block before comp, this is a perfect example. Also, my dog has been really naughty. I'm sorry, everyone. Perfect example here of, you know, with myself. 2 blocks out from comp, I tried to do 195 for a double on squat. And the block before, I hit 190 for a triple that was relatively comfortable, which is wild to say out loud. Like, me a year ago, my max was like 180. So to be at this point, like, I've been in this sport a long time, and obviously, tons of nerves at the rate I'm progressing, because I'm almost scared to accept that I can do these things now. But then I failed that double. And I was so upset that I failed that double. And then I walked away and I was like, you squatted 195 for a single on a terrible day, and you had the confidence to go for a second rep.
Yeah.
You aren't allowed to be upset by that. And in the moment, I thought it was a really bad session. I think I failed my top single on bench in the same session. But then I walked away, and like a few days later, I really thought about it. And I was like, you literally can't be upset and call that a bad session, because if you look at what you've lifted, that's still amazing. And like, I had a bad comp just after, went through a bit of a bad period. But like, I had a bad comp by my standards. But then a few days later, I looked at my open powerlifting and I realized I opened on 180 on squats. That was my max a year ago in comp. So really, was it a bad meet? No, because I still made my opening squat move like an opener, and I've progressed it by that much in a year. And I think all of this just to kind of say, and again, I'm trying to give examples to make it more kind of digestible, but what you think is a bad session is going to change a lot the more experienced you get. And again, with time and experience, you'll learn to compartmentalize and kind of give yourself a bit more grace when you do have what you would call a bad session. But you need to understand that what you think is a bad session, like to your coach, it's probably not a bad session, probably not a bad session at all. And actually, I always think people should, and I think if I had a coach, I would let my coach tell me if it was bad. I would just send everything over and say what's happened, and I'd let them give me the feedback rather than try and feedback myself, which I've spoken a little bit about earlier.
Yeah.
One other quick thing as well that I just want to say, so I've been talking for an hour already.
Oh my God.
I know. One other thing I was going to say as well is, you were saying about how you know, a lot of people you work with, they come to you because they want to become strong. And obviously the same thing with me with powerlifting. And I think a lot of people, similar to what I said about my own journey, when they join the gym, especially women, we're not joining the gym to get strong. It's happening more now, but we're usually joining to get smaller. And then all of a sudden we're like, no, do you know what? I want to be bigger. I want to be stronger. I want to see what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to allow yourself to almost say out loud that you're strong. Like, still to this day, like if I'm speaking to people just outside of lifting and the lifting world, just in my everyday life, they would, oh, so you're like really strong then? And I don't want to say yes, even though I am.
Why?
And I think, again, perspective. If you're a woman and you're squatting 90 kilos, that's really strong. It's easy to forget if you're looking at all these like higher level powerlifters and seeing, and I think a lot more powerlifters now are lifting these numbers that used to be seen. Like a 200 squat when I started was unbelievably rare, like crazy. And now you have like Sunita squatting over 300. It completely shifts our perspective. And like a female benching 50 kilos is still huge. Like most women, when they join the gym, can't bench the bar. And that is like the fact. Like, I used to work in a gym. Most women can't bench the bar. So to bench 50 kilos regularly is super strong, but it's almost like we have this barrier. And I think in the UK especially, it's something that we're kind of taught. And I think as women, we're kind of taught not to brag. And I think like we see calling ourselves strong as bragging, but no, like you are actually strong. Like categorically, you are strong. And shifting the narrative and allowing yourself to call yourself strong is only going to help you become stronger, because it's self-fulfilling prophecy. You need to believe it about yourself and be willing to say it out loud.
Yes, I adore that, like adore this topic. Like I have multiple podcast episodes on this exact thing. And even just for example, like you were saying earlier, like being in that territory where it's really exciting, but it's also terrifying at the same time. The dog's going crazy.
Yeah, I'm just chasing my dog around the room.
But where like your body is physically capable of insane things, but because your mind hasn't caught up to that being a possibility for you, or you actually being the identity of someone who can lift those loads, that's where we get those gaps. This is literally the reason why I do so much mindset work, is the minute you bridge that gap, suddenly a whole new realm of possibilities and like strength and delulu levels are available to you. But I love what you just said around like ownership of certain labels, or actually being confident enough, willing enough, bold enough to claim those types of titles. Because I literally spoke about this exact topic not that long ago, even just around like being a powerlifter. Like I remember for about 2 years, probably about 2 years after my first competition, I still had the words baby powerlifter in my Instagram bio, because there was reservation, right, around certain standards. And like, to call myself a power lifter, I'm only going to be worthy if I'm lifting this. And then I'd hit that and be like, oh yeah, but now everyone else is lifting this, so I have to hit this before I do it. And it is those like self-imposed glass ceilings that we put on ourselves. And I love just even questioning like, where the fuck has this come from? Like, who is telling you this? And I think this is the importance of surrounding yourself with the right things, like actually looking at the right pages, like watching the right people, like, but also more importantly, understanding what am I telling myself about myself when I watch this stuff. Because I've seen it before, even just from myself, like a year ago. If I'm having a great block, I do not look up or down or anywhere else, like when I'm watching other people lift, because I'm like, oh, I'm going so great right now. And I'll see someone else bossing it and be like, yeah, they're bossing it. Or I'll see someone else share a fail and I'll be like, wow, there's so many lessons are about to come like from them. But the minute you're in a more negative headspace, confirmation bias, self-fulfilling prophecies, that then we make it mean something about us. But everything that you just said about like ownership around labels, this is literally, it's the most uncomfortable thing, but when I say this is the biggest thing that has shifted my confidence and got me to where, like, I know going into my next competition, for example, it's hands down going to be my best. And me saying that a year ago would have been like, oh, I literally feel like I'm going to throw up. And it's just, I think, being bolder, being louder, being prouder of what we're doing, what we're achieving, and also what we're going after. Because I know you'd said there like a little while ago about like, I've got crazy goals, but I'm never going to utter them to anyone. And this is literally what I'm really like doing with my clients, is actually getting them to own their bigness, their boldness, because there's so much power in it. And I, for example, shared a really vulnerable post more recently about how my ex actually told me that unless you're going to be world champion, it was in a breakup, I know it was probably in the heat of the moment, but he literally said to me like, unless you're going to be world champion, I think you need to chill out. Like uttered those words.
My issue with this as well, though, and I'm going to interrupt you. Obviously, awful thing to say to anyone, especially even if it's during the breakup. Not necessary. But I feel like I've had to fight for years for people in my life, and this includes family as well. And my family is so lovely and supportive, for them to take what I do seriously. Yeah. Even things as little as, you know, if my sister has a barbecue for her birthday and I've got a comp a couple of weeks after, I'm going to take my Tupperware and I'm going to eat my own food, which obviously my immediate family totally get. But then they'll bring out the cake and everyone's like, well, you can just have a piece, which realistically, yes, I could. But also I would rather just not. And it's, oh, I can't go to this meal tonight because I've got to train. And they're like, well, just train a different day. Just move your session around. Just do something different, or do a shorter session. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't work like that. And like, I have always, since I started powerlifting, even before powerlifting, to be fair, just because I was so obsessed with the gym, and like before I really knew what I was doing, I always had set days I would go to the gym. And it would be like, when my routine was a little bit more kind of rigid with like a 9 to 5, it was always this time I am at the gym, nothing else can be planned. And I think getting people to understand that even if you're not a world-class lifter, you are allowed to take it as seriously as you want. And you are allowed to identify as a powerlifter. You are allowed to say, no, this is something I do for me. This is something I do. I have goals in. Because also, if everyone had that mindset, no one would be a world champion, because no one would dedicate themselves to see their potential. And I think that's a really like important message. Like, don't be afraid to say that this is important to you. And if people don't understand that it's important to you, yes, you can try and convince them that it is, but you just have to accept that they're not going to understand and just do it anyway.
Yeah.
And over time, they'll get it. Like they will.
And also, yeah, absolutely. And also, that's not our burden. Like, none of us have goals to convince other people that we're worthy of having those goals. They're our goals because they're our goals. And sometimes it really is as simple as that I want this because I want it. You know, and I think that's the biggest shift. Like you said with family, is like the minute we feel that it's our responsibility to have to constantly explain to them, it almost starts becoming like a way to convince us. Like, I think we sometimes almost internalize that, and we start feeling a bit weird for having these goals. And I think getting that bit bolder and louder, like you said, the only difference really between like world-class athletes at a very basic level, between them achieving what they've achieved and you not, is that they decided to go after it. Like, they decided to be that fucking bold. And like, when I was sharing this story about how my ex had literally said that to me, one, like, obviously it's just, he was uncomfortable with, you know, my level of dedication and whatnot. But even when we start looking at like women who are, well, I work with women, literally, obviously anyone that is louder, but I think that is even more powerful when it does come from a woman, when we have that level of conviction, when we really train with that type of almost like ferocity. I love it. Like, that energy will take you so fucking far. And the shift from like waiting for a permission slip, right? The minute you do that, you're stuck in waiting mode. Like, we have no self-trust. We're never lifting or going after things from a place of empowerment. It's a lack of trust, and actually starting to lean into a little bit more deluded, like making the shift from asking yourself whether it is too much to going like, okay, what's next? Holy fuck, how powerful is that? And like, the people that want to box you in, that says more about them than it does about you. Like, wanting to scale down and, you know, having people call you too much, believe that, why do you care so much, and scale it back and everything, that is all on them, and that is not our burden to bear. Like, the minute I got out of that type of environment, and obviously, like, side note now, not only am I with the man of my dreams, but literally will back me till the absolute dying days. If I want to go be world champion, like, he will back me. And there are people that will follow you to the ends of the earth to do that, like your coaches, your friends, the people that are in your environments. That is such an incredible place to be. And when like elements of, let's say, of even in that example, like, if you're not going to be world champion, I think you need to calm down. Like, calm down is just what they or other people will say to make themselves feel more comfortable. Because like, seeing, to me, a woman, let's say a lifter, whoever, rise, oh my god, like, jaw drop moment. Like, it's so powerful. I know that we touched on this even just in the really basic example in the first podcast that I was on, and we talked about bench and like how exciting it is when, as a woman, your bench starts coming up and it's like, oh my god. But like, taking that to a whole other level and like starting to take up space, like, even when we go into the gym for the first time as women, so many people will just back in a corner and they'll, you know, do a little a dumbbell circuit because it's where they're more comfortable. But I think starting to really be loud and proud is so powerful, because the minute we make it about someone else, like, we are making ourselves smaller for someone else's benefit. Like, but for these types of women, I know that, like, for who I work with, for me, like, when has that ever been me? Like, I was on stage at 6 years old in like bright pink costumes and makeup and stuff. And it's the same with powerlifting. Like, yes, there's a lot to prove, but like, we want to go big. So why would we hold ourselves back, you know? And I think the minute we stop asking for permission, making ourselves even just like palatable, more digestible for other people, you get louder, you get bolder, you will get stronger. Not even just on the platform. And this is what I love about my journey, not just with my own training, but with my clients as well. The same for you. We spoke about this on the first episode. It's who you become in the process. And getting stronger isn't just about what you lift or, you know, what you can do on comp day. It truly is the person that you become. And that's why I'm like, fuck fitting into a box. Like, no more. Like, if literally, even if you're, you know, a serial listener, I don't care. Like, if you get one thing from this episode, from my perspective, please let it be that you do not have to squash yourself to make yourself more palatable or digestible for other people's benefit. Like, if you can get louder, get prouder, choose to start showing up in that, like, trust me now, watch yourself fucking fly. It's actually insane.
I think also everything you've just said, obviously, I agree with. I was just going to touch on it as well in terms of, you know, we were saying about, obviously, people might not understand that why you're doing it or why you take it so seriously. And I think in my early 20s, I really felt that, and almost like this pressure to, I mean, I still took it seriously, but it was almost like this pressure that maybe maybe I shouldn't be. And it was more like, maybe I should be focusing on other things. But actually, like in the corporate job I had, and like with my boyfriend, when we like talk about other people that he worked with and have worked with and stuff, and basically when you just meet, for lack of a better term, normal everyday people in their late 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, if you ask them, I remember when I had my corporate job and I changed teams, everyone was asked to say a fun fact about themselves, and most people were just telling me either something about their kids or like their favorite book, which is fine. But it made me very quickly realize, and my boyfriend and I had the conversation at the time, I was like, I hope I never have nothing to say in that situation. And powerlifting, and when you talk to anyone just in everyday life, it's an incredible thing to say that you do. No one cares what level you compete at. If you have this hobby that you are dedicated to, like hobbies are so important when you get older as well. And like when you leave school, university, whatever you do, when you go into the working world, it can be hard to navigate and balance at first, but it's so important to have something. And it doesn't have to be lifting, but obviously lifting itself, linking into like the purpose of the episode and the confidence and everything we're talking about, nothing makes you feel more confident than realizing how physically strong you are. And then that will help you become more strong in every other aspect, like mentally, everything, emotionally. You will just become a stronger person overall. And I think it's really important, like if you do feel this pressure to almost shrink your goals and shrink your reasoning as to why, like, you don't need to have a reason why outside of I enjoy SBD, right? I want to be a powerlifter because I enjoy SBD. I don't want to compete, I just want to train, whatever. You don't have to justify it to anybody. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. But if you ever do feel this pressure that you maybe shouldn't be taking it as seriously, or you should skip a weekend because you want to go out drinking, or like your friends want you to go out drinking with them or something like that, you don't have to say yes to that. Like you don't have to justify it to anyone. And actually long term, you'll probably be really thankful to yourself for sticking with what you wanted to do, because it gives you something in your life, almost like an escape. And I don't like calling powerlifting an escape, especially like I say, I've got very ambitious goals. Like I really, and it's my job as well. Like I can't escape powerlifting if I wanted to, but like it is an escape, because again, why did you join the gym in the first place? A lot of people, some mental relief. And the gym is still that for most powerlifters or lifters in general. It's time for themselves to improve on themselves and work on themselves and forget about whatever is going on in the outside world as well. And I think people often forget, maybe because you're labeling yourself as a powerlifter and it's a sport specific thing, people forget that it offers that as well. I think a lot of the time, and that maybe people like if I said to, I don't know, when I was in my 20s, I was like, my name's Sean and I go to the gym 5 days a week. People be like, oh, that's really cool. But if I say I'm a powerlifter and I can't do X, Y, Z because I have to train and I can't move my training days around, it's almost like there's a negative connotation to that. But it's a lack of understanding. But obviously, all of this to basically just say, like, still go after what you want to do in your goals, because you will be thankful to yourself, like, as you get older. Like, I love that I have, like, my boyfriend has his wrestling, and I love that we have our things, because it makes our lives more entertaining. It makes our lives more interesting. And obviously, as you get older, like, if you have a family or something, you might not have as much time for these things, but you'll be thankful that you did dedicate your time to it when you were younger.
Literally. And going back to, I think you said this at the very start of the episode, around even just the idea of number chasing. Like, the minute you start doing solely that and just chasing the next level, I think is the minute you forget the reason you started in the first place. And this is why it's so important to reconnect with that. And this is why even just claiming the label of powerlifter, that there was probably a version of you that was absolutely gagging to even do that. There was absolutely like in awe of watching a woman deadlift. I know you're probably lifting double that, and you get to call yourself a powerlifter and you get to compete on the platform. Like, holy shit, you know? So you, again, for me, I use this word a lot, but you are almost doing yourself a disservice by not actually embracing that as a label. You should shut the dog out.
The dog has just eaten a whole cardboard box that had my stuff in it in the corner, so I'm gonna kick him out now.
Warranted. Okay, that's but yeah, like, you're almost doing yourself a disservice not to embrace those types of labels, because if there's a fear, if there's an ickiness around it, whatever, there was probably a version of you that wanted to do this so badly. And the minute that you forget that and you solely go, oh, I'm gonna focus on number chasing, pushing that, we want goals, of course, we're goal oriented beings, we need to strive for that, but the minute you disconnect from why you started, like that's when we are going to start feeling misaligned. We're going to start feeling overwhelmed. We're going to start feeling pressure. But the minute you can start then reconnecting with that, really like almost detaching from the outcome and just being, really enjoying the process of being again. Like, oh my God, are you going to start resonating with stuff so much better? And you're going to see so much more progress.
We've been on the call for an hour and a half now. So I think as long as you've got the time, we should maybe start
Yes.
going into more of when we say like doing the work and that side of things, kind of like what people can
Yes.
do and what can implement. And like if you were speaking to your clients, like I brought you on here because I know that, as we can tell, this is something you're incredibly passionate about, and it's something that I know you work on so much, not just with yourself as a lifter and obviously as your coach, like I see that within you, but also I know you work on it with all of your clients and stuff as well. So someone's coming to you and they are in a bit of a negative spiral. They are, bench press is the easiest example because I think women do struggle with bench press a lot. Their bench press is stalled, they're beating themselves up, and they're in this negative spiral of basically just calling it their bad lift or something along those lines. How would you tell them to then approach? What would you ask them to try and do? Because obviously it's easy to say and explain to them, you know, self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go in and say I'm going to have a bad bench session, or I'm a bad bencher, I do it myself with deadlift. You know, I say I'm a terrible deadlifter, my deadlift's my worst lift. Funnily enough, it's been progressing the least. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you have to find ways to get out of that habit. And as much as we can sit here and say, try and think more positively, that's obviously much easier said than done.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of nuances depending on the situations, where they're at, where their goals are at. A lot of the time, what we'll do anyway, so when I'm working, especially with a one-to-one client, there tends to be 4 different stages that I'll go through, which is to do with their programming, etc., etc. But one of the first things that I will always do is, whether it's an assessment or we then find something that needs shifting, is looking at their belief system. So there are lots of different ways that we can find it. And like I said, even in the example that I gave you of 2 of the clients, right? The first one that was, with feedback, almost internalizing, well, every time that she gives me negative or perception of negative feedback, even if it's obviously constructive criticism, that will be then internalized. And then when we talked it through, it was almost reinforcement of her that every time you give me this, I hear I'm not good enough. Okay, so we know that's the crux behind it. And once we start to pinpoint that, then we know how we can start to shift it. Or this other client who it maybe wasn't limiting belief work, it was actually that she was holding on to an old identity. So the second client example that I gave in week 1, right, that there was a fear, an inherent fear around it that was driving her actions because she was clinging to an old identity of someone, being small, being weak. And therefore, because she was so afraid of feeding back into that, then it was, dictating certain outcomes that were then affecting her training. So a lot of the time, it will just be following the thoughts, the feelings, the stuff that's coming out to the very, very end. I like to think of it a little bit like a pearl necklace. Like we can pick it off like one by one. So for example, if we're in a bench session, I'm not a good bencher, whatever. Okay, yeah, we can absolutely do some surface level work and it is still very productive, but you're going to get there quite a lot slower if we do it one by one, right? Well, self-fulfilling prophecy, every time you tell yourself that, I can give you some feedback and, we can work out ways to not enact those or whatever and take your power back around that. Or we can talk about how to be aware of our language and, not refer to yourself as a specialist, because then actually it means that, other things are becoming, we're not as good as that and we're framing it that way. Yes, those things are important, of course, but I like to think of it in this bead necklace, right? That every time we do one of those things, we can pluck one off. And we pluck one off and we sort of start getting to the deeper things, and you're probably going to start seeing more progress and feeling a little bit lighter and everything. But what is going to be so much more powerful is we can get to the very bottom of the bead, you snip that off, everything else falls. And so that really is the crux of it. A lot of the time is pinpointing what the actual core thing is. And you may not realize it. Like when I have these calls with clients, sometimes there'll be like 5 minutes of silence because they're just thinking. And I'm like, take it to the next level. And they're like, okay, I don't want to do this thing because I'm scared of certain thing. Or we follow that, blah, 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 we get to a fear of failure. And it's like, is that actually what you're worried about? Because okay, we might have a fear around failing a bench and what that might say, and we might be embarrassed or we don't want to injure ourselves and things like that. But what are you actually afraid of that confirming to you? And so in terms of actually pinpointing it, this is work that I do with clients, but actually framing this for yourself, go next level deeper. When you have a kid, they're like, oh, but why? Oh, but why? But why? But that's the train of thought that we kind of need to follow is, why are we feeling that? What is the actual deep rooted fear here? So let's say you get down to, it's a fear of failure. I'm scared of failing. Okay, but why? Why are you scared of failing? What are you afraid of it actually confirming to you? What are you afraid of it saying about you? A really good example that I see a lot is I'm not good enough. And yes, okay, we can do work on shifting that belief, but the more that you can pinpoint even just what it is, because you can have like, NLP trained coaches, people that do like real deep psychological work around shifting limiting beliefs, which we do elements of, and I'm doing my NLP qualifications. Like, it is important, but you can also still take action whilst understanding what it is. The first thing that we need to do is see it, right? Understand what it is, be able to pinpoint it. There is important work to be done in shifting it and rewriting it. But I think the minute you understand it, you're like, oh my God, it is like a mic drop moment. I did this inside like an 8-week challenge that I did. And the first like coaching session that I had with a client, we pinpointed this, and it was just like a light bulb moment. She was like, holy shit. And actually in that particular instance, we didn't need to do any more work, because she understood like, oh my, this is literally what it comes down to for everything. Like, give me any situation, this is the story that I continue to tell myself and perpetuate. And so it really is understanding, and for you guys listening, like following these thoughts right the way to the bottom to pinpoint what is the core thing that I continue to repeat, what story do I continue to tell myself. That, if you can have the awareness around that, yes, there's next stages in rewriting it and doing some deeper mindset work, but that level of awareness is so powerful. Because something that I tell my clients a lot is clarity breeds confidence. And a lot of the time when we just don't understand something, that's when it feels like it's a bigger deal, when it perpetuates a lot more. It's because there's just a lack of understanding. Same as if you were to apply it to lifting. If we don't understand a cue, well, how can we expect to apply it? This is kind of that same thing, that having that level of awareness around what the deep rooted belief story that you continue to repeat to yourself is the first stage. Like I said, yes, there's deeper work to be done. The next stage to that is actually seeing how it starts to come up. So for example, it might be that then, I repeat it, or this particular instance under the bench continues to perpetuate it a little bit more. And when we start to then again build awareness around it, we're like, okay, I see it. And something you said earlier, I don't think you use this exact word, but you were kind of alluding to it, is evidence, right? So again, the idea of celebration, like let's say we hit a new goal, or as a coach, we're like, this looks gorgeous, taking time to celebrate that is how we do it. So when we're looking at how the subconscious mind works, your brain, your subconscious will always choose the path of least resistance. We see this in lifting a lot as well. This is a direct comparison. Let's say you are, improving your deadlift technique. There's going to be certain ways that you do it because that's how you trained your body for so long. Maybe you shift into slightly stronger muscles or whatever, even if it's not the most optimal form for you. Bad example, but it helps to illustrate it, right? Your body will choose the path of least resistance. And so in terms of learning a new technique, it's going to take a lot of intentional work, intentional programming, intentional cues. The mind is kind of the same thing, that to you is so deep rooted. You've repeated it so many times. That's the path of least resistance. Of course, it feels easier. Of course, it feels safer. Of course, it feels like the easiest option to kind of default to, and that's why it feels like a default. So we have to do a lot of intentional and strategic and very conscious rewriting, right? So let's say we take a belief of I'm not good enough. What will start to happen, you have something called your RAS, it's your reticular activating system, and it's a bit like I always describe it a bit like a doorman, right? If you had some guy standing outside a club, their goal is to get as many like pretty ladies through the door, that's who they'll usher in, right? And they'll turn away groups of guys. Your RAS kind of works in the same way, that you will literally have a default. It will let in any evidence to support your belief system. It has a bias and it will turn away anything else. So even though there's all this other stuff that says you absolutely are good enough, because of your deep-rooted belief system, because it is the path of least resistance, that's all it will let in and support. So of course, in changing that, we have to very intentionally do it. And this literally comes from celebrating things, like intentionally seeking the evidence and then celebrating yourself for having it. Like, it's all the stuff that I do with my clients, I think sometimes can be perceived as like, oh, we celebrate wins. It's not a personality trait. It is literally an intentional thing, because the more that you celebrate things, the more you will actually then create those new neural pathways. Like if we have a belief that says I'm not good enough, that's going to be a thick boy, right? Because you've repeated it so many times over and over and over. It's like building your muscles, right? To get stronger, you have to do those exercises over and over and over. You have to get stronger in order to then build the muscle to actually then lift the weights. And then in terms of doing the same with your mindset, it's the same stuff. The same way that you would go to the gym and do your reps, we have to do the mental reps at home. And this is where over time, the more you then seek the evidence, celebrate yourself for the evidence and actually acknowledge what is there, whether it's, you know, consciously aware to you or whether we have to go and either create it or seek it. The more that you do that, the thicker that neural pathway becomes, and that then starts to become a new default. And that is literally just at a surface level, at a basic level, how we can start to then create those new beliefs and replace old ones, because we can't just stop something, right? Again, you can't just say I'm just going to stop thinking that I'm not good enough. You have to replace it with something else, otherwise it's never going to stick. And so this is that same thing, that we have to very intentionally either see the evidence, choose to see the evidence, celebrate it, or we have to create it. Like the same way that it could be 7 p.m, you've had the shittest day in the world, you still have the choice to turn that around. It's 7 p.m, okay, well, you might have 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever before bed. You could go and make some evidence to say, no, I'm not going to make this the worst day ever. I'm actually going to now choose to make this the best that I possibly can. It kind of works in the same way. So as a bit of a whistle stop tour, let's say you have someone who's repeating these limiting beliefs or thoughts, whatever, underneath the bar. This is what I would do with a client: is we follow it all the way to its absolute lowest level. Rather than plucking off the beads, we snip it right at the bottom. Everything else falls off. The minute you have that awareness, then we literally just have to celebrate, curate, create whatever new evidence that supports the belief that we actually want instead. That's kind of a whistle stop tour as to how I would approach this.
I actually really love that answer, and I think you've covered it really well, not just from the perspective of any people listening that are lifters, but also if there's any coaches listening as well. I think there's takeaways there in what you can do, because a big part of coaching, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I think a big part of coaching that is often missed, especially with online coaching, is the importance of nurturing the person and coaching the person, not just providing the lifting coaching, the program, the feedback, the analysis. You also need to help nurture that lifter into the person that's going to make them the best lifter, right? Help them become confident, help them become a bit delusional, and reinforce those positive things. It's not necessarily about what can we, like, you know, stop thinking negatively, blah blah blah. Like, obviously we know that's not going to work, but it's pinpointing the slight positives. And I think, you know, as you kind of said earlier, you know, as a coach, the first thing you'll always do is point out the positives. But if you know that your lifter is struggling with one thing in particular and they're sending you negative feedback about it, and we're using bench as the example, it's being able to say to them, I think you're being a bit harsh here. This looks good, and this looks good, and this looks good. And sometimes I then won't even apply any more feedback on things to work on, because I just think that's not, even if it's a different thing, like if you're just reinforcing the same cue as you were before, sometimes you need to just give them a block of just celebrating the wins and not worry necessarily about progress on the bar. Focus on progress of how they analyze their own work, because that will lead to more progress on the bar. Something else you said as well, kind of in the first phase of that, was about a lifter repeatedly saying they're not good enough. And I actually don't think we've really spoken too much about what, like, people saying this, which is a very common thing. I mean, I mentioned I kind of went through that as well. Like, I didn't think I was strong enough to take a lighter block, and it's a very backward way of thinking. And as you were kind of saying, I sat here and I was like, my favorite question to ask someone when they say that, which people hate, is what is good enough? Because again, your standards of what's good enough will change as you become better at something, because you'll always want to keep progressing. And wanting to progress is a fantastic quality and it's a fantastic trait, and it is going to lead you to more success. But if you can't ever celebrate where you're at, you're not going to get to where you want to go, because it is going to then lead into that negative spiral. And I think something that people, if you are someone that is, even if you don't say it out loud to your coach or to anyone else, if you do repeatedly beat yourself up for not feeling good enough, I think you need to sit down and say, okay, but what is good enough? And I also think if you've been doing this for a while, think, okay, well, what would me 10 years ago have thought was good? And just keep going back to your old self, and then look at how far you've come as well. And then you also basically said about how, and this is linking with the coaches as well, like as a coach, if you're listening to this and you want to help people become more confident and you think that's something that you kind of aren't as good at, it's the positive reinforcement will essentially breed the habits and beliefs that we're after. And taking ownership of your thoughts for the lifter is a vital thing. And I think the most powerful thing, and this is mentioned on my podcast with Adria as well, I think this is one of the things she said, was you need to take ownership of your thoughts, because nothing, and I said this earlier, nothing will make you more confident than realizing that your thoughts and your beliefs are within your own control. Obviously it takes time to work, and like, especially if it's a belief around something that's so ingrained in you, it is hard to work through that, but it is possible to do. And I think as a coach, you want to positively reinforce, like if your lifter says, something negative, but they also notice something positive about what they've done. Or if you're like, as a coach, like I will always ask my lifters what went well. And I, like, as a client, like with my nutrition check-ins every week, I have to say what went well this week. And it's my least favorite question. And
Yeah, this is
it's so
really
silly
common.
because it doesn't really matter what I put. Like my food is all tracked, everything is logged, I've answered everything I need to. It doesn't really matter what went well, but being forced to sit and think about what went well is a really important thing. And anytime the lifter sends me their videos, and if they've not really said much, I'll say, what do you think went well in this session? And teaching them to, even if it's something really minor and small, and then as a coach, I will then focus on that positive that they've picked to reinforce to them that that is a really positive thing, even if they've said it as a tiny little detail to just answer your question and eventually get you shut up. You still want to prove to them that there is a positive thing there, and that positive reinforcement will breed that habit and that belief, which is what you were obviously saying at the end there.
Yeah, literally this, because what I think a lot of people don't understand, have never been taught, is that your beliefs, like you said, will drive your thoughts. Your thoughts will drive your actions. Your actions will then drive the results that you get. And I think even just at the most basic level, so if you're missing a step, of course it's going to feel like a never-ending cycle until you actually pinpoint what the belief is that's holding you back right now. You're not going to rewrite the thoughts. If you don't rewrite the thoughts, your actions, your behaviors are going to be stemmed from that. So it really does kind of stem all the way back to having those beliefs. And like you said, something that you had mentioned that I do with my clients, I think any really good coach will do, is reflect back to the client. Like there's a reason that it is a sort of, it's a co-creation process in a way, right? A lot of the time we talk about it being relationships and things like that, but it's a two-way street. And I think I have never ever had a client who's benefited me from me just telling them to do something. It's creating an athlete comes from them also having the knowledge, right? It's our duty to teach them, and therefore for them to become more independent, to become autonomous athletes and lifters. But in order to do that, like there is so much value in just having someone who will reflect those things back to you. So even, for example, like you said, well, what is good enough? Like that, holy shit, it takes them straight out of their head and helps them to, actually reflect on things, to change those thoughts. The same way that if I had a client or a lifter who's really, really reinforcing it and they're really struggling with the wins, my clients probably hate me sometimes, but I will push them to do really uncomfortable stuff. Like I can think of one particular client who hates celebrating her wins because she finds it so uncomfortable. And I'm like, that's why we need to do it. Your homework today is literally to come back with me to me after your session with 5 different wins. Get stretchy. Like that is where the expansion happens. And I think, again, when it comes to shifting these things, the more that you can do that as a coach, like obviously not being a bitch with it, but the more that you can reflect those things back to the clients, not only are they going to become more autonomous, more aware, you're going to become more confident in how to actually deal with those things, but they're going to then start really collapsing time in how their confidence grows, in how their beliefs shift, that therefore are going to impact their thoughts, therefore their actions, therefore their results. Like it's such an incredible thing the minute you can start helping clients to really get to the crux of it without even actually saying anything yourself. It's those slight leading questions of like, okay, do we actually agree with that? Like taking a client who, I don't know, said this isn't good enough, or like they have to be at a certain standard before they compete or before the next competition. Do you actually agree with that? Like tell me where that's come from. Like have you got any evidence to say that, just challenging certain things is so powerful. So I really love that. And like I said, even just like you said, the positive reinforcement, it's not only how you're going to start creating new beliefs and new thought patterns, but it literally opens your eyes to so much more. Like there is a story that I always share when I talk about this. I watched the TikTok it was ages ago now, but it was a couple who was basically saying every time that they would come home from work and they'd brain dump about, what was shit with their day and blah, 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 they realized how negative an environment that was creating. So they literally set themselves the task of taking a photo of the best part of their day, kind of just to start now having something positive to share when they got back. And the only intention that they had was to start reinforcing a more positive environment where it wasn't just shit. But a byproduct of that they didn't even see coming, they shared, was basically that they actually started looking forward to the best part of their day. So it might be at 11 o'clock, God knows, I don't know, a co-worker made them the most incredible cup of tea, right? And they were going to take a photo of that as the best part of their day. But then they started realizing that they were going, oh, I'm not going to take a photo of that because what if something even better happens? Like, what if I have this, I don't know, meeting with my boss and I get a load of compliments? Or what happens if I go for a walk after work? Like, I don't know, and I see something, you know what I mean? And they started then literally actively being like, oh, that might not be the best part of my day. It might be this, it might be this. And what we don't realize is how powerful that is. It isn't just the environment. It isn't just then, yay, I get to celebrate myself and feel good and get some little dopamine hits. It's that it literally will shift your brain to building awareness without the evidence happening. And this is what we start to do with shifting and completely flipping those on its head. Like, that is how powerful just getting your clients or doing that as yourself as a lifter, in celebrating your wins and actively being like, yeah, this was good. Or if something in the moment didn't feel good, reflecting back on it and going, okay, I'm going to force myself to see a win here. Like, that in and of itself is the most powerful thing that you can do for building your confidence, for actually growing as a lifter. Like, it's so insane.
I actually love that idea so much. And it very much is the message of you're learning to look for the positives rather than just solely focusing on the negatives. And it's not an easy thing to do, but the idea of just taking a photo of essentially you're taking a photo of anything that could be the best part of your day, which means you're focusing on everything positive, even if it is something as small as a cup of tea or a nice snack or a compliment, like a really small minor compliment or something. You're going to feel a lot more positive about everything if that's the way you're looking at the world. Like, if you look at the world through a negative lens, you're going to have negative outcomes, same as if you have positive. And it isn't as simple as just a switch in your head and you can do that. But the idea of start searching for a positive, and like you said with your clients, you'll set the task of, okay, I want 5 positives from this session. Or even if you do it from this perspective of the whole week, you know, at the end of each week, I want you to give me 5 things that you think you've done well this week within your nutrition and your training. And then they come back to you with that, and it's like, okay, well, that's great, next week I want 6. And they can be the same things, but if you just start acknowledging what you're doing well, it becomes much easier. And actually, something I thought of earlier when we were talking, I'm going to give another example. Obviously, I won't name any names, but I've got a client who has been really dialing in his nutrition. He'd been in quite a lot of bad habits, a little bit of a health scare, and he'd been really dialing in his nutrition over the last 3 or 4 months. And he said it had started to slip. And I said, has it slipped? Or is it just compared to what you've been doing, it slipped? Like, if you compare this to what you were doing 4, 5, 6 months ago, how does it compare? And they were like, well, actually, to be honest, it's the odd, I don't know, like the odd pack of crisps. And I'm like,
yeah,
what would you have been eating 6 months ago? And like the odd fizzy drink or something, like sugary drink or something like that. And I'm like, if you look at what you were doing 6 months ago versus what you're doing now and what you're considering bad now, and this is where that perspective of what you think is good enough is, it comes into play. It's, you know, there's more motorbikes going past, so if you can hear them, I'm sorry. It's learning and holding yourself to a standard, but also acknowledging that you can't be critical of yourself because you've got those higher standards. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, I know this is something that you've kind of been learning with your own training, and I think because you're a coach as well, you'll be the first to nitpick something really minor that's gone wrong that I probably can't even see in your videos, but you'll tell me about it, and then obviously I will notice it. But it's also like, is that really a big enough deal to worry about? No, but you're holding yourself to a high standard and a high standard of execution, which is great. But you need to then not let it actually be a negative thought, just I might need to work on this next time. Yeah, it's just shifting that perspective. And I wonder, just before we wrap up, if you're happy to, like, I think this year you've completely transformed as a lifter. Like, you have become, like, even the comp you did, was it March time? April?
Yeah, March. Yeah.
The way you were as a person going into that was so different to what you were like literally just a couple of months before. And I just wondered if there's any specific work that you personally did to get to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of what I've shared, to be honest. And actually, funnily enough, after this, I'm going to be recording my own podcast episode literally about that transformation and exactly what I did to completely shift my confidence. It quite honestly is a lot of work that I've shared, like, on today's episode. I think the biggest things that I realized, it's taking ownership where it's needed and giving yourself the fucking permission to let go of what isn't needed. Like, there was so much pressure that I realized was coming from myself. I also, around that time, so it was for British Nationals back in November, I had a lot of health stuff that was going on at the time that was out of my control. But what I've realized now, and this is that balance between giving yourself grace where it's needed, but also taking ownership where it's needed, that I also realized so much was coming from how, like, what I was making it mean about me in those situations. There was stuff that I couldn't control, but I was internalizing it so much. You know, if, I don't know, like, one bad thing, I would literally let it take over my entire world. And that has been a huge shift in taking ownership of letting go of the shit that needs letting go of. That in and of itself is a huge skill. But I think really starting to look inwards at like how much my lack of belief in myself was running the show, and knowing that it needed to change. Like, this is also where even just letting myself celebrate it, like when you're in that state of negativity, like complete victim spiral, everything will reaffirm what you're afraid of it reaffirming, because it is just the nature of self-fulfilling prophecies. That thing that you keep telling yourself you don't want to happen, you're going to bring about because of how you're speaking to yourself. Like, and that is exactly what happened. I was like completely convinced myself that I did not deserve to be on that platform, that, you know, I'd literally told myself I'm going to come last, blah, blah, blah. Because of the way that I was speaking to myself, guess what kept fucking happening? In prep, I was going in thinking I'm not going to be able to hit this. I failed it. I'd get to the platform, convince myself I didn't deserve to be there. That's how I was showing up. I didn't want to come last. Guess what happened? I literally came last. In and of itself, it was a huge feat, but this is really all about reframing perspective, and it's so hard to do in those moments. But looking back at it, like, the goal was to get to nationals. I got to nationals. Like, everything else was a bonus. Who the fuck cares if I came last? Like, that was what I'd wanted for 2 years, and I got there. Like, it really is perspective. It's shifting those reframes. I think it's taking accountability and ownership, and it's celebrating the fuck out of yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Like, since starting with you, that's something that you've seen from myself, is that yes, okay, there's been some negative things, but I've also started celebrating myself a lot more and actually leaning into things. And also, I think, as a slight tangent that we haven't really touched on today, that is important, but I think is a slightly more difficult thing, but is very relevant in powerlifting, is regulating your nervous system. And this is also where it ties so much more into mindset work, is that when you are constantly belittling yourself, talking like shit about yourself, reaffirming limiting beliefs, like, that also impacts your physical state, because when we're reinforcing stuff, you get yourself into a point of stress, right? And that is going to impact your recovery. That's going to follow you through into your sessions. That is literally going to dictate everything. And it's all the kind of, I think, back in the day that I used to maybe see as a little bit woo woo and wacky, and I'll never be that girl. But even just things like doing a bit of visualization, doing journaling. Like, I also have ADHD. Like, your gal's very in her head. There's a lot going on up there. So sometimes even just being able to get it out, like verbal vomit on paper, like doing some reflections in that way, has been really good for me. And it's stuff that maybe people don't resonate with, but I think is really important. You don't have to go to the extremes of like meditating and EFT tapping or anything like that. Of course, they're incredible skills, and if they feel good to you, amazing. But I think sometimes just understanding that your mind and your body are so connected, it's ridiculous. Like, even for me, I have IBS. Like, I'm not ashamed of that, and that was one of the big health things that happened around nationals. And there was such an intrinsic link between how I was talking to myself and the regularity of my flare-ups. The same way, since I've been working with you, times when I've been stressed and not looking after myself, guess what happens? I have flare-ups. Like, I think the biggest thing that to understand is we don't just talk about mindset and confidence for the sake of it, because yeah, it's nice to be confident. It also sometimes, it really is as drastic as boiling down to your health. And this is something that I have had to learn the hard way, was the minute you are not looking after yourself up here, it will follow through. And that shift, like actually starting to just appreciate how important my mindset was. It's the same as anything. We don't want to learn from health scares and things that it has to happen that way, but sometimes we do need those reality checks. And that was the biggest one for me, was to make sure that I was looking after this as much as I was my body. Regulating my nervous system a little bit more. I literally have like little dance parties with myself now. Like, if I'm having a bit of a shit day, that is the easiest way to regulate your body and your nervous system, but also to shift your state. Like, do wacky things like that. And they are crazy and they are weird, but this is what has made me have such like a complete 180 in 6 months. Like, the comp that I've got coming up again, like I'm so excited for, because I know that I'm like going to be starting to hit levels that a year ago would have been unfathomable to me. And that truly boils down to the work that I've done in 6 months. So yeah, if stuff feels weird, it feels uncomfortable, if you keep delaying that, well, you're just going to get more uncomfortable things. You're going to take longer to get to your goals. And I think one thing that I've really embraced is get a bit delulu, like get weird with stuff. No one else sees the dance parties I have in my kitchen. Like, who the fuck cares? But for me, I know that it helps so much to get into those states, to regulate my nervous system, etc. So it is so much of the work that I've done, like that I've shared with you guys on this episode. But I also think it's been leaning into some of the weird stuff that I have suppressed for ages. But more than anything, I think it is acknowledging that your mind, your body, and therefore your belief system and your strength are so intrinsically linked that I think without one, there are going to be constant blocks. There are going to be other things that come up with your health, with your nervous system, with whatever, that will hold you back from what everyone listening to this knows that they are capable of. it's plugging that gap, because the minute that you do that, like the world is your fucking oyster. No joke.
No, that was literally the perfect kind of roundup of everything. And I like you that you've kind of linked in with yourself as well. My headphones and camera are about to die, so we will start wrapping up. But I think it was really important that you mentioned there, obviously, the fact that we're not just saying this to be like, oh, you should, do all this mindfulness stuff. No, not at all. Like, I couldn't sit down and meditate. It's just not something I think I would want to, like, I couldn't make myself do it. But I will make sure I do things that switch my brain off and look after myself. And I will challenge myself when I don't want to do something because I feel uncomfortable. And I will allow myself to obviously become confident and look after myself in different ways like that. I also just think it's really important as well, like, you have to look after your health in all aspects. And like you said, you were dealing with IBS and like health things going on internationals. And that was so, and we know we literally can see this whenever you have flare up. It's just linked to stress. It's linked to that. And like having little dance parties, if that just makes you happy, it boosts your serotonin, you feel good. Why not? Like, you're in your kitchen on your own, like put some music on, do whatever you want to do.
Who cares?
To become adults, it's really important to think back to when you were a kid and when you were younger, when you were running around and you were happy. Like, fair enough, you had a lot less cares when you were a kid, but just don't be afraid to lean into it in a child a little bit and just do things that make you feel good and happy, even if it seems silly. No one has to do it with you. No one has to see you doing it. Like, just don't be afraid to do these little things that make you happy. Even something as simple as, like, I don't know, like if you feel like you're not like socializing or you want to move more. And actually, when I had Melina on, we were talking about, it wasn't like linked to this at all, but we were talking about, as we've gotten older, we kind of miss feeling a bit athletic. And like, we used to play sports when we were younger, and like, I miss like going to the football. My camera's literally about to die. I miss like going down to and just thinking about my friends and something as simple as that. And if I watched that now, like, I would probably feel really good. So why not just arrange to do that and do things like that make me feel good? And like simple as put some music on in the kitchen. Put some music on while you're doing the washing up in the kitchen and just dance around when you do it. Like, you'll feel in a good mood for it. You become so regimented, I think, as you get older, and you almost forget that you are still supposed to be having fun, and it's okay to do silly little things that you just enjoy. Like, why not? Like, it will make you feel good in yourself, and the better you feel in yourself, like mentally but also physically, like, it all links in, and the healthier you will be as a person as well. And like managing your stress levels, it literally all links in. And if you're listening to this from the perspective of wanting to improve as an athlete, you have to improve as a person and in your general health to be able to do that.
This literally. And it was everything we were speaking about having a life outside powerlifting, no matter whether you are family oriented, career oriented, or athlete and that's your entire world oriented. Like, I love what you said about connecting to your inner child and having a bit more fun, because I think this is, again, if I was to look back on it, something that shifted my experience so much is just letting that weight go a little bit. But like, it's a full body fucking thing. Like, this is all the work that I do, what I speak to clients about. Like, it is never just the thing. It's what I speak about on my podcast. It's never just the lifting, it's what it means to us. But when it comes to mindset, even just mental health, it's never just that. It's everything else that improves as a result of those things improving as well. Like, I cannot stress enough the beauty but also the power of doing this type of work. Like, it's fucking incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. We will wrap up there. We've been talking for 2 hours. Thank you for being made it to the end, anyone listening. Did you want to just shout out your socials and where people can find you for coaching and things as well before we end the call?
Of course. So my podcast is probably the best way to really get to know my work and what I cover, what I do. It's a great space anyway. I've pumped a lot of love and joy into that, and it's called Lift to Lift Yourself on Spotify. But you can also find me on bethfit.uk on Instagram, or BethFit Coaching, which is also in my bio. And honestly, DM me, like, even just takeaways from this episode. That really is my love language. I would love to know what's resonated, but that's also where you can find anything around coaching, offers, etc.